Hello, I'm Isabella.
Good morning. My name's Eric Carter.
Eric, can you tell me a little bit about when you were born and your life before the war?
I was born on the 12th of February in 1920. I got my matriculation in those days. I think it's equivalent to your A levels. And when I left school, I went in for accountancy. In fact, I passed my accountancy exams, but office work wasn't for me. And the war broke out in 1939, so I volunteered to be trained as a pilot.
Eric, why did you join the RAF as opposed to the Navy or the Army?
In 1939, there was a lot of bombing on the south of England, and they decided to send about 300 children by ship to Canada. Just off Liverpool, the Germans torpedoed the ship, although it had red crosses on it, and they were all drowned. I was only 19, but this really infuriated me, and that was when I decided I should do something about it. If you really want to know why I joined the RAF, I was dating a young lady from Billesley. That's local to here, isn't it? And I told her, and I said I wanted to go into to do something about it. She says, well, you go and see my dad. He's the recruiting officer in Dale End in Birmingham, and he'll put you right. So I went down to Dale End in Birmingham, and he said, well, what would you like to be? I said, I don't know. He said, what about a pilot? I said, oh yeah, that'll do me fine. So he signed me up there and then, and that's how I became a pilot.
How and where were you trained as a pilot?
It takes about 9 or 10 months to train for a pilot. It did in those days. So I started off at Stoke-on-Trent, flying little aircraft. I went solo after 9 hours. 9 hours with the instructor. And then they moved me up to Lavington, which is near Chippenham, which is close to Bristol. And then I was moved up to Newcastle, where I was trained. I was finishing off my training on Hurricanes. Before that, I was trained on Hearts and Audaxes. We were in a terrible condition as regards no air force or arms, and I was trained on Hearts and Audaxes, which was the First World War aircraft, biplane, and we were told if things got really worse in the Battle of Britain, I'd be expected to fly that against Messerschmitts.
So you weren't in the Battle of Britain?
No, I wasn't. I was training in the battle at the time of the Battle of Britain, and I should have joined the Battle of Britain. In fact, I was posted to 615 Squadron, which was Churchill's squadron. But they had lost all the pilots in the Battle of Britain. They were flying from the south of England. And when I got there, the whole squadron had to move to Valley in North Wales to re-equip with pilots and reorganise. So I actually missed the fighting in the Battle of Britain, but I was flying in the battle at the time of the Battle of Britain. In fact, I was on convoy patrol and defence of Manchester and Liverpool during that time.
What happened to you after the Battle of Britain?
Well, as I say, I was escorting convoys from Liverpool down to South Wales. I was also flying Defiance. That was an airplane all painted black, and it was night flying. It was not very pleasant at all. Germans used to send over condors to bomb the convoys, and they were bombing Liverpool and Manchester, and that's where I first started taking serious action. If you've never seen a Messerschmitt, that is the Messerschmitt. And that is a Spitfire. That has 12 machine guns in the leading edge there.
I gather you're involved in Operation Benedict. What was that?
That's right. I was defence of Liverpool and Manchester, and then one day I was on having a few days leave. I'd gone to my parents' house that lived in Bourneville in Birmingham, and a policeman came to the door and said, report back to your squadron immediately. I did this, and they said, you're posted to Leconfield, which is near Hull. No one knew anything about what it was. I got there was 38 pilots there and 500 ground staff. It was all top secret. No one knew where we were going. We weren't allowed to mix with the rest of the camp. We weren't allowed to ride home. We weren't allowed to go home. And then one dark night, I was put on the train at Hull. All the windows were blacked out. We were taken across to Liverpool, straight onto a ship. And we hadn't got a clue where we were going, but we had equipped for the Middle East, all our tropical kit, etc. When we were about 3 days out from Liverpool, on the Landsteffen Castle, a captain came on to the tannoy and said, you can throw your kit overboard because you're not going to the Middle East, you're going to Russia. The reason we were going to Russia was because the Germans had taken all the countries on the west of Russia. If you look at the map, he'd taken France, Belgium, Holland, Norway, and all the other countries up the borders of Russia. And there was just one little spot in the Arctic Circle called Murmansk. It was a port that never freezes. It's in the Arctic Circle, and that's where we were going. We had to keep that free from the Germans, although they were only about 10 miles away. We had to hold on to that at all costs, because if that fell, there was no way any help could be sent to Russia.
It must have been very cold.
Yes, it was very cold. Most of the time it was -40. All the aircraft engines and the transport engines of the lorries had to be started up every half an hour, else they froze them day and night, else they froze up solid and it would be impossible to start them again. So they were started up every 20 minutes, every half an hour. The operation was called Benedicts. If you see any books referring to Benedict, that's the operation that we were involved with. The Germans were flying these Messerschmitts, were very, very good aircraft. They were about 30 feet wide, and about 33 feet long. They had cannons, and they were a very formidable enemy. We had, this was Spitfire. I was actually flying Hurricanes, which is very similar to this. They had 6 machine guns in each side, firing 1,000 rounds a minute each. And they were focused on a point 200 yards ahead. At that point, they would blast through 2-inch steel without any trouble at all. And you could have incendiary. Every 10th bullet could be incendiary, which if you were flying against targets that would burn, then you could, they'd be phosphorus bullets that would set fire to whatever you were flying at. I escorted 30 trips escorting Russian bombers over to the German lines. We never lost a bomber on any of the trips, which was quite good, because before that the Russians were losing a considerable amount of bombers on each trip.
Who had the better planes?
That depends on what you were trying to do. The Spitfire was a wonderful airplane. It was a queen of all aircraft, that was. But if you would, you had to be a better pilot to fly a Spitfire than the Hurricane pilot, because the Spitfire, the Hurricane had a wide undercarriage there, like that. The Spitfire had the little undercarriage, used to come together like that. The Spitfire come open like that. And so when you were landing, you'd got to be absolutely spot on, else you could dip a wing very easily. With the Hurricane, you could bounce it in, and it was very forgiving. It wouldn't turn around and bite you. It was easily, if you were shot at, and it was, you had bullet holes in it, it was easily repaired. Now the Spitfire wasn't so easily repaired. It had to have whole sections replaced. It was faster than the Hurricane, of course, but not so manoeuvrable. The Hurricane was very manoeuvrable, and we shot down. As a matter of fact, in the Battle of Britain, more German aircraft were shot down by Hurricanes than by the Spitfire. But the Spitfire sounded more romantic, and that's why it gets so much publicity.
Was the Hurricane better than the Messerschmitt?
I think the answer would be, the answer to that question would be easily answered by the fact that in the Battle of Britain, the ratio of kills against the Hurricane was 1 Hurricane shot down to 5 Germans. That was the ratio, and that's why the German Air Force did not go any further with their invasion, because their losses were absolutely colossal. In fact, they ran out of aircraft. The Germans did, because their losses, the ratio of losses was so great. So that's an answer. But also, of course, the Spitfire did their share as well.
How long were you involved in Operation Benedict?
Well, I went out on the Landsteffen Castle, which was a luxury ship which had been converted to troop carrying in July 1941, and I came back from Russia in the early part of 1942. So we were there only a short time, but it was a very active time. In fact, it was Russia's Battle of Britain. The losses were absolutely colossal. The Germans had surrounded Leningrad. They were 10 miles from Moscow. They lost 2 million defending Leningrad. It's quite unbelievable, and it's hard to comprehend the losses that were. I can tell you stories about, gruesome stories about they were burying their dead in big graves, hundreds in holes as big as a tennis court, and then just putting the earth back on the top. But it was beginning to cause disease with the rotting bodies, and I can later on, when the Queen went to Russia in 1994, 5. And I went with the Queen. We were taken to these graves, and there's rows of them, like tennis courts, raised above the ground about 2 foot. And in each one, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of bodies that have been buried that were killed at Leningrad.
Was Operation Benedict a success?
Most certainly it was, because the Germans never did take Murmansk. We sent 3,000 aircraft into Murmansk, Hurricanes, to equip the Russian Air Force, because they had nothing there. They had nothing, the Russian army. We sent thousands of tons of tanks, ammunition, all going in through Murmansk to equip the Russian army. If you take a minute to think, if Murmansk had fallen, no help could have been sent to Russia. It's worth considering that the Germans would quite easily have conquered Russia. If they had have done that, I don't think we should have lasted many weeks if there was no Eastern Front. So it was vital that Murmansk was held. It was. So that's the answer to your question. Was it worth it?
What happened to you after Operation Benedict?
Oh, I came home, and in those days life was very cheap, not like it is now. I was given 48 hours to get married. I was engaged to a very nice young lady from North Wales, Penmanard in North Wales. They gave me 48 hours to get married in 1943. And shortly after that, I was posted to Burma, and I was there for 3 years. I don't think they'd look kindly on that today, where they're away from their wives for 3 years.
Can you tell me about your medals?
The Russians have been very good to me. They're very good to all their ex-service people. And I've been back to Russia 10 or 12 times since the war. In fact, last year, my son lives in America now. He's lived there for 40 years, 30 years. And I had permission to take him, which was quite an achievement for an American to be taken to Russia. It took a lot of visas and string pulling. But my son Andrew went back with me. We went to Murmansk, then up to Severomorsk, which is a forbidden city. Not many Westerners have ever been to Severomorsk. It's the headquarters of their atomic fleet. We were taken on one of their submarines, and we were showed all their latest aircraft, which is very, very rare for a Westerner to see. I've got 2 Russian medals, which you see here, which I've been given over the years. And last year, they were giving me, on the last day that I was there, in Severomorsk, with my son, they were giving me a banquet, or a little dinner, shall we say. Now, just going back to 1941, the hero of Soviet Air Force was a chap called Safonov. He was equivalent to our Vader or Johnny Johnson or someone like that. I flew with him quite a number of times, and he was killed a few months after we came back to England. But he did have a son. He was married, and he had a little son. And the son was about 3 years old when he was killed. Now, when they were giving me this banquet last year, on the last night before coming home, they'd gone to the trouble to find his son, who was now about 68. And at the banquet, he was sitting on one side of me, and my son was sitting this side of me. And it was quite emotional, because this son was asking what his dad was like, whether he was a good pilot, was he a nice chap, because he never knew his dad, you see. And of course, the Russian television was there, and the media, and it was quite an emotional time. And then yesterday, I had a hard day yesterday. I went down to the Russian embassy. They asked me to go down to the Russian embassy in London, and the ambassador there presented me with this medal and flowers and the usual supply of food and drinks, champagne and the rest of it. And they treated me very well.
Eric, it's been really nice to meet you. Thank you.
Well, I've enjoyed talking to you. I hope it will give you youngsters an insight. I'm pleased you're learning about the war, because if it's forgotten, I'm sure it will happen again. And the best way to stop it happening again is for you youngsters to know all about it and what caused it.